February 3rd, 1945, 2:31 p.m., 22,000 feet above the Rhineland. The air was so cold it burned the lungs even through an oxygen mask. Staff Sergeant Alan Eugene Magee felt the flak burst before he heard it, a hammer blow of concussion that punched through his chest, followed by the metallic shriek of shrapnel tearing through aluminum. The nose section of the B-17G, snap, crackle, pop, disintegrated around him in a spray of plexiglass and twisted metal. One moment he was checking oxygen connections in the cramped bombardier compartment. The next he was tumbling through freezing sky with no aircraft beneath him and no parachute on his back. The slipstream tore his gloves away first, then his oxygen mask. His hands clawed at empty air, searching for something, anything, to arrest the fall. There was nothing but sky and the scream of wind and the terrible mathematical certainty that 22,000 feet of altitude would kill him in approximately 90 seconds. His hand found the D-ring on his chest pack instinctively, muscle memory from 100 practice drills. He yanked hard. The ring came away in his palm, disconnected, useless. His parachute was still inside the bomber, strapped to the bulkhead where he'd left it 5 minutes earlier to move freely in the confined space. He was falling at terminal velocity toward frozen German earth with no way to slow down, no way to survive, and maybe 8 seconds before the choice was taken from him entirely. If this story doesn't make you hit subscribe, nothing will, because what happened next shouldn't be possible. The strategic bombing campaign over Germany in February 1945 was entering its final, most savage phase. The 8th Air Force was hemorrhaging men and machines at rates that made earlier losses look merciful. German flak batteries, refined through years of desperate innovation, had evolved into precision murder machines. The 88mm guns could reach 40,000 feet and compute firing solutions fast enough to track bomber streams through cloud cover. Each shell contained enough high explosive to shred a B-17's wing at 200 yards. The mission on February 3rd targeted rail yards at Saint-Nazaire, a critical German logistics node feeding the Western Front. Intelligence had promised moderate resistance. Intelligence, as usual, was catastrophically wrong. 17 flak batteries ringed the target zone, veterans who'd been killing Allied airmen since 1940, who knew their craft with deadly precision. The 360th Bomb Squadron flew lead position in the 303rd Bomb Group's formation, which meant they'd be first into the flak field. 21 B-17s had launched from Molesworth that frozen morning. 18 would return. The 3 that didn't would scatter 30 men across the German countryside, most of them dead before they hit the ground. Staff Sergeant Alan Eugene Magee was 22 years old, from Plainfield, New Jersey, trained as a ball turret gunner, but serving as a flexible gunner that day because the ball position was filled. He'd completed 13 missions, unlucky 13, the superstitious whispered, each one a 6-hour journey through frozen hell where boys turned into statistics. Combat over Germany wasn't like the movies. It was mechanical slaughter conducted at 4 miles altitude where the cold could kill you as quickly as German steel. The human body does extraordinary things when faced with certain death. Magee's consciousness split into parallel tracks. One part screamed in animal terror. Another calculated his descent rate with mechanical precision. Terminal velocity at this altitude was approximately 120 miles per hour, which gave him 90 seconds before impact. A third part, eerily calm, observed the sky around him with detached curiosity. That's when he saw salvation, or something close to it. 300 feet below and slightly left, another figure was falling. Unlike Magee, this man had a parachute deployed, 28 feet of white silk blossoming above him, slowing his descent from terminal velocity to a survivable 16 feet per second. But something was wrong. The man hung limp in his harness, head lolled to one side, arms dangling loose. Unconscious, maybe dead, blown clear by the same explosion that had taken Magee, knocked senseless by shrapnel or concussion. Technical Sergeant Joseph Raymond Russo, nose gunner, 23 years old, from Providence, Rhode Island. Magee didn't know his name then, didn't know anything except that 300 feet below him was a deployed parachute and maybe, impossibly, a chance. The physics were insane. Magee was falling at 120 miles per hour. Russo, decelerated by his canopy, was descending at maybe 16 feet per second, roughly 11 miles per hour. The relative velocity between them was over 100 miles per hour. Magee had perhaps 8 seconds before the altitude differential made interception mathematically impossible. There was no training for this, no manual, no procedure that covered skydiving without a parachute to intercept another falling airman. Just physics, desperation, and the choice between dying passively or dying while trying something no one had ever attempted. Magee made his choice in the space between heartbeats. He angled his body head first, arms pinned to his sides, legs pressed together, transforming himself from a tumbling object into something approximating an arrow. The human body in freefall can generate minimal directional control. Skydivers decades later would prove this scientifically. But Magee learned it through pure instinct. 5 degrees of angle, maybe less. But it was enough. The distance closed with sickening speed. 300 feet became 200. 200 became 150. Magee's vision narrowed to a tunnel focused entirely on Rousseau's limp form, suspended beneath white silk. The ground was an abstraction. The war was irrelevant. Nothing existed except shrinking yards of air between two falling men. At 17,000 feet, he punched through a cloud layer. The world turned white. Complete disorientation. He couldn't see Rousseau, couldn't see anything except water vapor condensing on his eyelashes, turning his vision into a blur. The cloud was maybe 400 feet thick, 3 seconds of blindness. But 3 seconds at terminal velocity meant 480 feet of vertical distance. If he drifted off course, if he lost his streamlined position, if he panicked for even an instant, he'd miss Rousseau entirely and die alone. He held position through muscle memory and prayer. 22 years of life compressed into 3 seconds of blind faith. Then he burst through the cloud base at 16,500 feet, and Rousseau was still there, 70 feet below. The distance contracted with terrible finality. 70 became 40. 40 became 20. Magee could see details now. Rousseau's leather jacket torn at the shoulder, his oxygen mask hanging by one strap, frozen blood in his hair where shrapnel had opened his scalp. The parachute risers stretched taut above him, white nylon lines connecting harness to canopy, their only hope hanging by threads of woven silk. At 15 feet, Magee spread his arms and legs, creating maximum drag. The sudden air resistance hit him like a wall. His flight suit rippled violently. His jaw clenched against deceleration forces that felt like they'd tear his limbs off. But it worked. His descent slowed relative to Rousseau's canopy-braked fall, still insanely fast, still terminal by any reasonable measure, but slow enough that he wouldn't simply smash through Rousseau like a missile. 7 feet, 3 feet, impact. Magee slammed into Rousseau from above with the force of a head-on collision. His arms wrapped around the unconscious gunner's torso, hands scrabbling desperately for purchase on the parachute harness. His legs locked around Rousseau's waist in a death grip. His face pressed against Rousseau's back, tasting leather and blood and the metallic bite of high-altitude cold. The parachute canopy bucked violently. 28 feet of silk designed to support 250 pounds was now trying to decelerate 400 pounds of falling humanity. The canopy rippled and deformed, its carefully calculated aerodynamics collapsing under impossible load. It didn't fail completely. That would have meant instant death. But it lost coherence. Air spilled from the edges. The center compressed upward into a dome instead of maintaining its designed cup shape. Their rate of descent increased from 16 to approximately 40 feet per second, 27 miles per hour instead of 11. Still slower than freefall, still fast enough to kill. They punched back through the cloud layer at 12,000 feet, spinning now. The unbalanced load turned them into a gyroscope. Magee's grip on Rousseau's harness was everything. His fingers were cramping, locked into claws around nylon webbing. His arms burned with lactic acid. Every instinct screamed to let go, to relieve the agony, but letting go meant death, and death was no longer acceptable now that survival had become theoretically possible. The spin worsened. Centrifugal force pulled at Magee's body, trying to pry him loose. The parachute twisted above them, risers wrapping around each other, canopy becoming a corkscrew that was losing its ability to generate lift. Through the rotation, Magee caught strobing glimpses of the ground rising to meet them. Snow-covered fields, dark patches of forest, a town with a church steeple, all growing larger with each revolution. At 7,000 feet, Russo regained consciousness. He came awake with a strangled scream, disoriented, in agony, feeling weight on his torso and assuming he was trapped in the bomber's wreckage. He thrashed, trying to free himself, his movements throwing them into an even more violent spin. "Stop!" Magee screamed into his ear, voice barely audible over the slipstream. "Don't move! I've got you! Don't fight me!" Russo froze, combat instinct cutting through panic. He looked down and saw empty air beneath his feet, looked up and saw the twisted parachute barely functioning overhead, felt the death grip of someone clinging to his back. Understanding came in a flash of terrible clarity. They were falling together, falling too fast, falling towards certain death. "My grip's slipping," Magee shouted. "When we hit, let go, roll away from me." 4,000 feet, details resolved with terrifying clarity. They were coming down on the outskirts of Saint-Nazaire, the very town they'd been bombing. Below them stretched a mixed landscape of buildings, roads, and open ground. Their trajectory was carrying them toward a structure with a peaked glass roof, the town's railway station. At 2,000 feet, the spin stabilized slightly. The parachute, though twisted and deformed, still generated enough drag to keep them below terminal velocity. They were falling at roughly 40 miles per hour, triple the survivable landing speed for a normal parachute descent, but a third of what it would have been without silk overhead. 1,000 feet. The station's Victorian-era glass skylight filled their vision. Built in 1897, the structure featured ornate ironwork supporting hundreds of glass panes designed to flood the platform with natural light. Beautiful architecture. Terrible landing zone. "Brace!" Russo shouted, the only word that mattered. 500 feet. Magee's arms were numb, fingers locked into claws around Russo's harness, muscles frozen in sustained contraction beyond conscious control. He couldn't have let go if he'd wanted to. 200 feet. German soldiers on the platform looked up, pointing, shouting. Some ran for cover. Others raised weapons, then lowered them, understanding that shooting falling men was pointless when gravity was already doing the work. 100 feet. The skylight glass gleamed in afternoon sun, each pane framed by ironwork that would shred human flesh like industrial machinery. 50 feet. Time dilated into slow motion. Magee's mind processed details with supernatural clarity. Rust stains on iron trusses, bird nests in roof corners, the faces of German soldiers frozen in horrified fascination. 20 feet. The parachute canopy snagged on the roof's peak, jerking them to a momentary stop that felt like being hit by a truck. Then the old silk tore and they dropped again, slower now, the partial canopy acting as a brake. They hit the glass skylight at 37 miles per hour, 2 miles per hour slower than they would have without the momentary catch. A trivial difference in numbers, the difference between annihilation and catastrophe. The glass exploded around them in a storm of razored shards. The iron framework smashed into Russo's right leg, shattering his femur with an audible crack that echoed across the platform. He screamed, the sound swallowed by breaking glass and twisting metal. They fell through the destroyed skylight and hit the concrete platform 22 feet below. The impact separated them instantly. Russo hit first, his body absorbing the primary shock. Magee landed a split second later, rolling instinctively as his training had taught him, his momentum carrying him across the platform away from the debris field, then silence. The kind that follows catastrophe, when the world holds its breath, waiting to see who survives. Technical Sergeant Joseph Raymond Russo died within minutes. The combination of impact trauma, the shattered femur that severed his femoral artery, and internal injuries from the initial bomber explosion proved too much. He bled out on the concrete platform surrounded by enemy soldiers who could do nothing but watch. His last words, gasped to a German medic who spoke broken English, were, "Did he make it?" The other guy. Staff Sergeant Alan Eugene Magee opened his eyes. Pain arrived as a tsunami. His right arm was shattered, both bones fractured in multiple places. 3 ribs on his left side were broken, one of them puncturing his lung. His nose was crushed flat against his face. His right knee was dislocated, the kneecap visible under the skin, in the wrong position. Glass cuts crisscrossed every inch of exposed skin, painting him red from forehead to boots. But he was breathing, alive, impossibly, inexplicably alive. A German soldier appeared in his field of vision, young, blonde, wearing the Feldgrau uniform of the Wehrmacht. The soldier stared down at him with an expression caught between reverence and horror. "Unmöglich," he whispered. "Impossible." More soldiers gathered, forming a circle around the shattered American lying in a pool of blood and shattered glass. An Unteroffizier pushed through with a medical bag, kneeling beside Magee with hands surprisingly gentle. "You fell from the bomber, yes?" the medic asked in accented English. "How high?" Magee tried to speak. Blood filled his mouth from his crushed nose. He coughed, spraying red across concrete. 22,000 feet, he finally managed. "No chute." Grabbed him. Halfway down. The German medic's hands stopped moving. He looked up at his comrades, repeated Magee's words in German. Disbelief rippled through the assembled soldiers. 7,000 meters. No parachute. Caught another man in midair. It was physically impossible. The medic crossed himself, a gesture that seemed to surprise him as much as the watching soldiers. "God im Himmel," he murmured. "God in heaven." They carried Magee to a German field hospital in Saint-Nazaire, where Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a veteran surgeon who'd been practicing medicine since 1918, spent 8 hours reconstructing shattered bones and repairing a punctured lung. Bauer had treated everything from trench foot to tank crew burn victims across 2 wars. He'd never seen anyone survive what this American had survived. "The broken ribs should have killed you," Bauer told Magee 4 days later through an interpreter. "The punctured lung should have drowned you in your own blood before reaching the ground. The compound fractures should have severed major arteries. The impact velocity alone should have been fatal. You are medically dead 10 times over. Yet here you are complaining about the quality of our coffee. I don't understand it. No one does." Word of Magee's fall spread through German military channels with the speed of legend. Soldiers who witnessed it wrote letters home describing the impossible American who had fallen from the sky without a parachute. Luftwaffe pilots discussed it in ready rooms, debating whether it was propaganda or miracle. The station commander filed an official report documenting the incident, complete with witness statements from 17 German soldiers. Magee spent 3 months in German POW hospitals, then transferred to Stalag Luft III until liberation in April 1945. The story of his fall spread through Allied prisoner camps faster than influenza. American officers initially dismissed it as exaggeration, the kind of tall tale that proliferated in camps where boredom and trauma produced increasingly fantastic stories. But German military records confirmed every detail. The bomber's altitude at destruction, 22,000 feet. 2 crew members observed falling, 1 parachute deployed, 2 bodies arriving simultaneously at the station, medical records documenting injuries consistent with high-velocity impact. 17 witness statements describing the same impossible event. After liberation, the U.S. Army Air Forces conducted extensive interviews with Magee and examined captured German records. The resulting classified report, declassified in 1973, concluded that Magee's account was accurate in all verifiable particulars. He had fallen from 22,000 feet without a parachute, had intercepted another falling airman, and had survived impact at approximately 37 miles per hour. The report's conclusion was stark. This incident represents the longest documented freefall survival, with parachute interception in military aviation history. That Sergeant Magee successfully executed controlled flight without aircraft or parachute, intercepted another falling airman, maintained grip through violent descent, and survived impact suggests human capabilities under extreme stress that exceed current understanding of aerodynamic physics and human physiology. The survival of one subject and death of the other, despite identical impact circumstances, remains unexplained. The physics of what Magee accomplished haunted aeronautical engineers for decades. At 22,000 feet, terminal velocity for a human body is approximately 120 miles per hour. To close a 300-foot gap required generating forward velocity while maintaining vertical descent. The human body in freefall can generate minimal horizontal movement, perhaps 10 to 15 miles per hour in optimal conditions. Magee had 8 seconds of useful intercept window before altitude loss made the attempt impossible. He'd executed a maneuver that wouldn't be formally described by skydivers until the 1960s, using body position to generate directional control during freefall. He'd calculated descent rates, intercept angles, and timing while falling at terminal velocity through freezing air with no instruments, no training, and no second chance. Then he'd grabbed onto another human being, falling at differential velocity of over 100 miles per hour, and held on. The parachute's response to double loading was equally remarkable. Standard military parachutes of the era were designed for a maximum load of 250 pounds. 2 men plus equipment totaled approximately 400 pounds. The canopy should have collapsed entirely, resulting in near-terminal velocity impact. Instead, it deformed and slowed them to approximately 40 feet per second, 27 miles per hour. Still 3 times faster than a normal parachute landing, but slow enough that survival became theoretically possible. The Skylight's partial catch reduced their speed by another 2 miles per hour in the final seconds. Those 2 miles per hour made the difference between certain death and catastrophic injury. Why Magee survived while Russo died remained the most haunting question. They'd fallen together, hit the same skylight, landed on the same platform within seconds of each other. Medical examiners theorized that Russo, already injured from the bomber explosion and unconscious during most of the descent, absorbed more of the initial skylight impact. His shattered femur severed the femoral artery, an injury that even immediate medical care might not have saved. Magee, conscious and able to roll on impact, distributed landing forces across his entire body rather than concentrating them in specific areas. His broken arm and ribs were severe, but not immediately life-threatening. The punctured lung was caught early enough that it didn't completely collapse. He'd survived by inches and seconds. Any one factor changed, and he would have joined Russo in death. Technical Sergeant Joseph Raymond Russo was buried in the American Cemetery at Normandy. Plot Section D, Row 12, Grave 47. His family received a letter from Staff Sergeant Alan Magee explaining that Russo had saved his life, that without Russo's parachute they both would have died, that Russo deserved recognition as a hero. The letter arrived 3 months after the telegram. Mrs. Antoinette Russo kept it for the rest of her life, creased and recreased from repeated reading. Alan Eugene Magee lived until 2003, 58 years after falling through 4 miles of German sky with nothing between him and death except impossible physics and a stranger's parachute. He never flew again, never wanted to. The ground was fine, he'd say with a slight smile. The ground was wonderful, actually, but he told his story to anyone who would listen, not because it was remarkable, though it was, but because he wanted people to remember Joseph Russo, the unconscious gunner whose parachute had given them both a chance, even though only one of them had taken it all the way to the ground. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, the German surgeon who treated Magee, emigrated to America in 1954. He tracked down Magee in Plainfield, New Jersey, knocked on his door on a Saturday afternoon in October, and stood there speechless for a full minute. Finally, he said in careful English, "I wanted to see that you were still real. After the war, I sometimes thought I'd imagined you, that nothing so impossible could actually happen." They became friends, corresponded until Bauer's death in '91. In one letter, the doctor wrote, "I have spent 46 years trying to understand how you survived. I have calculated the forces involved, studied the physics, examined every variable. The mathematics say you should have died. Every textbook, every medical principle, every precedent says 22,000 feet without a parachute equals death. But mathematics don't account for the human spirit's refusal to accept the inevitable. You decided not to die. Somehow that was enough. The story endures because it violates everything we understand about survival. Every law of physics, every principle of medicine, every statistical analysis says that falling 22,000 feet without a parachute equals death. Period. No exceptions. But on February 3, 1945, above a French town whose rail yards had been bombed into rubble, a 22-year-old kid from New Jersey proved that impossibility is just probability that hasn't happened yet. He fell. He caught another man in midair. He held on through forces that should have torn them apart. And he walked away, eventually, from a death that was mathematically certain. The station in Saint-Nazaire still bears the scars. The skylight was rebuilt in 1947, but locals can still point out where modern glass replaced Victorian panes shattered by 2 falling Americans. A small brass plaque on the platform wall commemorates both men. Joseph Raymond Russo, who died bringing his comrade to earth gently enough to survive, and Alan Eugene Magee, who lived to tell about it. On clear winter afternoons when contrails streak the sky above Saint-Nazaire, elderly residents who remember the war will sometimes look up and shake their heads. They'll tell the story to grandchildren who don't quite believe it because it sounds like Hollywood fiction, not historical fact. But the scars on Magee's right arm were real. The medical records at Stalag Luft 3 were real. The 17 German witness statements were real. Joseph Rousseau's grave in Normandy is real. The declassified Army Air Force's report, stamped secret until 1973, is real. What happened over Germany that February afternoon violated every rule written by engineers and doctors. It shouldn't have worked. The physics were wrong. The mathematics were impossible. The human body couldn't generate enough directional control in freefall. The parachute couldn't support double weight. Impact at 27 miles per hour should have been instantly fatal. But it happened anyway. 2 men fell 4 miles through freezing February sky. One died doing the impossible. The other survived it. In his final interview before his death in 2003, Alan Magee was asked if he considered himself lucky. He thought for a long moment, fingers unconsciously rubbing the scars on his right arm. "Lucky," he finally said. "Joe Russo died saving me. I don't know if that's luck. I lived 58 extra years he didn't get. That's not luck. That's debt. A debt I've been trying to repay by making sure his name isn't forgotten." He paused, looking out the window of his New Jersey home toward a sky that hadn't tried to kill him in 58 years. People ask me what I remember most about the fall. They expect me to say the terror, the impact, the pain. But what I remember is the moment I realized I might actually reach Joe's parachute. That split second when impossible became maybe. That's what I remember. Not the fear, but the hope. The mathematics say it couldn't happen. The history says it did. Sometimes that's all the answer we get. 2 men fell from a dying bomber at 22,000 feet on a freezing February afternoon in 1945. One had a parachute but was unconscious. The other had nothing but desperation and 8 seconds to decide between passive death and active survival. The one with nothing caught the one with everything. They fell together through cloud and sky in the final terrible seconds before impact. They hit the ground doing 40 miles per hour instead of 120. That difference, those 80 miles per hour of velocity that silk and luck and physics removed, made the difference between 2 dead men and 1 survivor. Joseph Raymond Rousseau gave his life providing that difference. Alan Eugene Magee spent 58 years making sure the world remembered it. The story survives because it shouldn't be possible, yet happened anyway. Because sometimes, against all odds in physics and common sense, impossible becomes real. The sky above Saint-Nazaire looks peaceful now. Contrails fade without violence. Clouds drift without concealing falling men. But on February afternoons when the light is right, when shadows stretch long across the rebuilt station platform, locals swear they can still hear it. The scream of wind through torn metal, the crack of breaking glass, the impossible sound of hope defying gravity. 2 men fell that day. One died a hero, one lived to bear witness. And somewhere between